When Christopher Columbus discovered Cuba's amazing flora and extraordinarily abundant turquoise fishing waters, he declared that this was the most beautiful land he'd seen anywhere in the world. Yet he couldn't possibly know the extent of the wonders that lay just a few feet beneath his boat. 5 centuries later,
Aún en esas circunstancias, Cuba y la revolución cubana seguirían luchando y seguirían resistiendo.
60 years of isolation, embargo and lack of resources have forced the Cubans to carry out ecologically driven policies, eliminating pollution from heavy industries and chemicals from agriculture and industrial fishing. The consequences of this imposed isolation is a heritage both exceptional and surprising. Cuba has remained a natural paradise, unique in the world. But on this island, the size of Switzerland, the downside is that the lack of money and resources has meant Cuban scientists have not always been able to extend their research over the whole of the territory. And all of a sudden, the march of history sets off again.
Todos somos americanos.
The island's isolation is coming to an end, and it's predicted that in the next 5 years, tourism will rise from 3 to 7 million visitors a year for a country with barely 11 million inhabitants. Neither the population nor the island's ecosystems are prepared for this. Along with Eduardo Abreu, Leslie Fernandez and Alexi Ruiz, 30 or so scientists from the Department of Ecology are caught up in a race against the clock. They have no more than 2 or 3 years to find the indispensable zones of reproduction, highlight the species in danger, and root out the animals that cause harm. A huge task, which will make it easier for the natural environment to absorb the avalanche of tourists while preserving the unique character of the island. Biologist Leslie Fernandez is amused whenever a rare handful of tourists turn up on one of the 600 deserted islands of the Queen's Gardens archipelago. They're all aware of how lucky they are to set foot on this natural reserve. They feel like they've arrived on Virgin Island, where the animals, never having encountered humans, will be nothing but friendly.
The Queen's Gardens are one of the best preserved regions, not only in Cuba, but in the whole of the Caribbean. This region resembles what the Caribbean looked like several hundred years ago. Today, a careful and sustainable tourism model is developing. The right management procedures are being put into place so that tourism and the natural world can cohabit here.
If it looks like the land-based iguanas are posing for photographs, or if the Cuban hutia, one of the last descendants of a now extinct rodent family, are cheerfully accepting food from the tourists, it's because this is all about the animals observing the humans and not the other way round. Leslie has spent 2 years recording the behaviour of both photographers and animals, and has come up with figures limiting the number of tourists, how much they can feed the animals, and how often they can visit the archipelago. This allows the animals to maintain their natural lifestyle despite the presence of visitors.
The future of the Queen's Gardens. If the management norms, which we've set up here, are put in place, then the future will be marvelous. Well, very good, I would say. But for that, these decisions must be respected. Otherwise, there's a risk of losing what is still the jewel of the Caribbean.
Taking advantage of these timeless moments of tranquility, none of the tourists are aware that there's a real menace circling the island. In all likelihood, this crocodile was driven away by a tropical storm, or by the construction of new seaside resorts, and has found its way from Florida to Cuba, a distance of 300 miles. Just like many tourists, this newcomer set out looking for a haven of tranquility. But in the case of this crocodile, it was a life-threatening quest. For this journey of 2 to 3 weeks in the high seas is a tough challenge for a cold-blooded animal who tires easily. If this acuto crocodile, also known as the American crocodile, had come alone, the Cuban ecosystem would have no problem assimilating it into its rich natural world. As it goes deeper into the mangroves, familiar sounds seem to catch its attention. Getting closer, it comes across a colony of cousins from Mexico, Puerto Rico and Florida. These American crocodiles are a seawater and swamp species, which can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh half a ton. The Americans are roaming around the territory of the native Cuban crocodile, the rhombifer. These are much smaller animals, 2.5 meters long and weighing less than 100 kilos, and whose population barely number 3,000. This makes them the rarest crocodiles in the world. Eduardo Abreu is in charge of the natural reserve of the Zapata Swamp, and his job is to ensure that the American crocodiles do not encroach into the 500 square kilometer territory of the Cuban crocodiles. He's partnered by Gustavo Souza, who reintroduced 200 Cuban crocodiles from his breeding farm into the wild last year. Their aim? To extend the rhombiferous natural territory and fight against their extinction.
Gustavito, let's try and find the eggs. Here. I think I can feel some here.
Yes, and over here too.
Okay, let's take away the earth.
It seems the nest. Oh, I've got one here. Look. Look here. There are several altogether. Be careful, don't pull them out too much. I'd say they're eggs which are less than 50 days old. So that means we can work with them because the embryo will already be fairly strong. But we have to handle them carefully because the way we hold them has an influence on the temperature inside the egg. Look at the color on top, and look at the size. That means that it's a fertile embryo, because when the eggs are laid, many of them are unfertilized. 85.65 millimeters. Width, 42.67.
How much does it weigh?
100 grams. So, Eduardo, we're going to reconstruct a nest, but be really careful, because in our research on the Cuban crocodile population, as well as counting them and localizing them, above all, we have to be extra careful with the nests.
It is absolutely vital that the two men put each egg back in its precise place in the nest, which is warmer in the centre than on the sides. With crocodiles, the temperature of the egg determines the future sex of the animal. Below 31 degrees, it will be a female. Over 32 degrees, a male. 40 days later, the baby crocodile bites through the shell with a temporary tooth that will soon fall out and calls out, whimpering for its mother. The mother's response is to entice them into the water. For their first 6 months, 90% of them will be eaten by predators, such as vultures, snakes, or cannibalized by male crocodiles. Having made it to the river, the safest place for them, where their mother lying on the riverbed can keep an eye on them. The babies then have to avoid a major danger, being carried away by the current and losing the protection of their parent. For their first 2 years, until they reach 50 centimeters long and become too big for most of their predators, they live under the tight protection of their mother. Luckily, they're also protected by the biologists of the natural parks, for otherwise this species would not survive alongside the huge American crocodiles. In the 6,000 square kilometers of mangrove swamps which surround Cuba, these little crocodiles are far from being alone. This is where the young of more than 1,200 different animal species make their first tiny steps. Without the mangrove, 2/3 of Cuban aquatic species would simply disappear.
In Cuba, and in the Caribbean in general, mangrove swamps are where the most biodiversity can be found. One can observe an incalculable number of species of fish, which find not only refuge here, but food. During their early months, the fish's offspring can find dozens of little hiding places within the ecosystem of the swamps. Undoubtedly, the mangroves represent the largest reservoir of juvenile fish in Cuba. And it's possible to spot in several places other young fish from open sea species, such as barracudas or even sharks. So, in fact, the visible part of the mangrove is not only an ecosystem, which is of vital importance for the reproduction and the protection of dozens of vertebrates, such as birds, and for a certain number of mammals, but also an area which is indispensable to the survival of marine species.
Cuba wouldn't be the natural paradise that it is without the mangroves. They protect the coastlines from damage by cyclones and tropical storms. After the rains, they help to filter out the mud, which is the principal cause of the choking and destruction of reefs, which can be observed in almost all of Central America. Once they get past the juvenile stage, during which they're too small to defend themselves, ocean fish swim out to the place where the rest of their lives will unfold. The 2,000 kilometers of coral reef which surround the island of Cuba. Whereas half of the coral reefs around most of Central America have disappeared, the Cuban reef, which is considered the richest reef in the world, has been totally preserved, thanks to the slow development of the island. This fragile ecosystem houses more than 900 species of fish, 50 types of coral, and 200 types of sponge. However, the price of fame could be fatal. 17 reefs, adding up to nearly 800 kilometers in length, are now open to fans of scuba diving, and the demand is ever increasing. For the moment, a balance seems to be maintained, and everyone goes about their business. Like these parrotfish in the throes of their love dance. A complex sanctuary of wilderness in total harmony, seemingly unchanged for thousands of years. Faced with the predicted arrival of mass tourism and the lack of a proper hotel infrastructure, the government has authorised the local population to build a certain number of guest rooms in private houses. Without access to modern materials due to the embargo, the builders are forced to turn back the clock to old, forgotten techniques. They're rediscovering a surprising maritime heritage.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. What's the rock like? Not too hard?
So-so, it's a bit difficult.
When you work with rock here, do you ever find sea fossils?
Yes, we do find some. In fact, come and see what we found here.
Ah, it's a bivalve, a fossilized shell. It's proof that there's marine sediment here. And in this limestone, did you find anything else?
Absolutely. We found lots of things. Look, here's a fossil which seems very rare.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's a tooth from a shark which lived here 30 million years ago, during the Pleistocene era, an era which came to an end 1.5 million years ago. It was a huge animal. This is a very interesting discovery. I'm going to show it to one of my friends who is a shark specialist. All the fossils found here are from marine animals, because this limestone is entirely composed of marine sediment. This was the ocean floor before Cuba appeared. Everything which sank to the bottom accumulated here and helped to create this particular type of rock. You're really doing some major work here.
Before the island of Cuba ever existed, a shark measuring nearly 15 meters, called the megalodon, 3 times as big as the largest great white shark of our era, dominated the ocean depths for more than 20 million years. The megalodon is the largest predator that's ever existed. A force of nature, weighing 40 tons and as long as an articulated truck. The species became extinct 1.5 million years ago, having no suitable prey to feed on. But sharks are still widely prevalent around Cuba, including the silky shark, which took over when the megalodon became extinct. "90% of the world's shark population has been wiped out in the last 50 years, and 40 million of them are still being hunted every year." But Cuba is in no way affected by this situation. The island is a real refuge for all tropical shark species. In fact, the island is probably the last remaining productive and birth zone for many of them. This is the job assigned to Noel Lopez. He dives every day for months amongst the sharks to try and section off the key mating and rearing areas so that scientists from the protected marine parks can more easily prohibit any commercial shark fishing. To achieve this, they're going to try something innovative so that they can study the sharks without having to catch them. These sharks coming towards them are silky sharks, animals which are 2.50 meters and are reputed to be fairly aggressive, involved in 6 attacks a year. But Noel stays calm because he's developed a secret trick. Shark skin is covered with ultra-sensitive sensors, which allow the animals to detect the slightest movement within a range of about 100 meters. By squeezing and folding the end of the shark's fins, Noel induces a sudden influx of information which the animal feels right through its body. This totally confuses the messages reaching the brain. The sharks instantly fall into a state of paralysis called catatonia. This gentle method enables the divers to work out the length, age and sex of the animal without having to catch it and remove it from the water. What the divers have noticed is that the different sharks observed in this part of the reef are exclusively females. What's even better is that one of them has a metal tag that Alexei Ruiz, the Cuban shark specialist, had placed on her. So where had she been all this time? More research will be necessary.
So, how did it go?
Very well.
How many sharks did you see?
6. 6 sharks. We saw a tag, number 57.
One of them had a tag?
It was number 57. We didn't see it straight away because all the seaweed was around it. But once we got her still, we cleaned her up.
So number 57.
It's quite difficult to get them to be completely still. Each shark has its own personality. Some of them don't really like it. And they move around so much, you have to let them go. But for the majority, it works fine. And you can read the tags or put ones on.
It's the same every time. If they move like this, it's because they don't like it. And so it's best to let them go. If they don't like it, they can turn around and bite you. You have to wait and do it just like you do it. And as soon as they turn like this, then it's fine.
This test, which has been carried out many dozens of times, has always come up with the same result. There are only females. Since they take themselves away from the males when it's time to give birth, this would suggest that there's a rearing area close by. So this reef will be classified as untouchable for the 4 months corresponding to the birth cycle. Eduardo wants to be able to prove that Cuba is indeed one of the rare birthing areas in the Caribbean for silky sharks. Time is short, and in the hope of confirming his theory, he's going with Alexei Ruiz, the specialist, deep into the heart of Las Salinas. If baby ocean sharks had been born in this southern part of the island, then it would be in this environment, protected from predators, that they would have spent the first few months of their lives. To make future research easier, Alexei takes routine measurements of each area under study.
So, give me the temperature.
25.1 degrees centigrade. Oxygen, 62.4 over 100.
62.4 over 100. Now, can you give me the salinity?
42.3 grams per liter.
Okay, you can turn it off now. And this evening, we'll compile all the measurements that we've got.
In these murky waters saturated by sand, it's almost impossible to spot the baby sharks. They have to be caught, and so to do this, the biologists use barbless fishhooks, which are less harmful. For hours on end, the fishermen search every nook and cranny of the Las Salinas.
There's a shark here. Look, over there. Over there on the right. It's taking the bait.
Hold it there, with the head on this side. So first, I need you to tell me how long it is right up to its fin.
84 centimeters.
Now let's find out what sex it is. Did you write down that it's a male? Hold it by its head. Lift it up. Can you see the claspers?
Both male sharks and rays are easily recognizable, since they're the only marine animals to have two penises, the evolutionary remains of pelvic fins. The two organs are never in use at the same time.
Give me the outer measurement.
Outer, 2 centimeters, no more. So now, let's give it a number. We're going to use a tag with a plastic head, which is important. Let's do it. The marker goes right in the middle of the first dorsal fin. Gently, and the shark feels nothing. We just need to test that the tag is holding okay. Number of the marker, write it down. I'll spell it out.
Okay?
CD. CD.
Yes?
00 0 4. Take the hook out of the mouth. You just have to pull. Perfect.
This cataloguing of sub-adult sharks will be carried out over the next 2 years and should help to confirm the presence of a reproductive area. From now on, protecting the reef means no commercial fishing, no permanent building projects, and no water sports over the 1,000 square kilometers of Las Salinas. But in fact, tourist complexes are one of the major issues that the Ministry of Ecology have to deal with. On the northern coast of Cuba, Punta Hicacos and the Cayos Blancos make up a group of islands 22 kilometers long. A succession of hotels and natural resorts which were constructed hurriedly and don't always conform to correct environmental standards. The Cayos Blancos are home to mangroves and royal palm trees, as well as being an important reserve for more than 70 species of birds, 5 of whom are native to Cuba. This archipelago is an almost perfect example of how tourism and nature can be integrated, something Cuba would like to extend elsewhere. But some hotels were built too close to the coastline, and therefore to rectify past mistakes, the regional authority has taken a radical decision concerning one of its own state-run hotels. From now on, in Matanzas province, it's tourism which must adapt to nature and not the other way round. In order for nature tourism to succeed, the Ecology Ministry has some alternative ideas, such as floating hotels. By definition mobile, each hotel only stays a few years in the same place. then moves a few miles away to another spot, and so on.
Hey, how you doing?
10 floating hotels house the same number of guests as a 5-story building with 150 rooms. The impact of tourism is therefore spread out and short-lived in any given area. Nature can then take all the time it wants to recover once the mobile structure has moved on. Staying in these hotels in the heart of the wilderness is a unique experience, since it enables tourists to come into direct contact with some of the area's remarkable animals. Noel's expertise means that he can offer tourists the chance to dive with sharks. But it's a complex operation. Sharks within a radius of less than a kilometre are attracted by the low-frequency sound of the motors and by the commotion caused by divers, and they soon arrive. Then, to keep their attention, bait is used. But only a small amount, to avoid creating a feeding frenzy, which would force the divers rapidly out of the water. Once the sharks start swimming calmly around the divers, a box filled with bait is lowered into the water. The predatory nature of sharks is stimulated and means that they'll instinctively seek out where the smell of the food is coming from, while knowing that it's not from the divers. But in order for this technique to work all year round, Noel has to change area and shark group for each dive. It's a technique based on the curious nature of sharks, and it enables divers to take some incredible photos in safe conditions and without interfering with the shark's natural behaviour. But danger still exists. If a shark becomes frustrated at not finding enough food, it could suddenly attack a diver. Or worse, the sharks could associate boat, divers and food together. Even just going swimming would become risky. In the interests of Cuba's natural habitats, Noel and the Office of Marine Parks once again have put in place extremely strict measures to regulate this perennial activity. In this aquatic paradise, there's an issue which needs Noel and Leslie's urgent attention. It's hard to imagine that one of the Central American reef's worst nightmares was caused by just 6 fish who escaped from a Florida aquarium during Hurricane Andrew in 1992. The lionfish, originally from the Pacific, has no natural predator in the Atlantic. And each female lays 2 million eggs a year. In 10 years, lionfish have invaded the whole of the Caribbean, including Cuba. Half of the species present in the reef today are in danger of being replaced by this pest. It's a huge problem for which there doesn't seem to be a solution. But back in the familiar surroundings of the Queen's Gardens, Noel has patiently been developing a most original idea. He discovered that in their native Pacific, lionfish are eaten daily by groupers and sharks. So their Caribbean cousins just need to be persuaded that lionfish are a perfectly edible prey. The extremely poisonous spines are what worry the predators. The groupers have to work out that their pallets made of cartilage will protect them from the spines, but there's only one way of finding out. After months of trying, mission accomplished. Sharks are more easily persuaded. They also have pallets of cartilage which don't get damaged by the venomous spines. After 3 years of hard work and patience, it seems that Noel and his team's approach has successfully taken off and been emulated along the 150-kilometre Queen's Gardens Reef.
The latest reports we've received have shown that there's been a reduction in lionfish density. This means that their population has decreased. With your experience, what do you make of that?
There have been articles explaining that it is possible, in order to reduce the threat of lionfish, to teach different predators to eat them.
That's something that really interests me, the idea that fishes can learn. Do you think that's true?
I don't think so. I know so. We now have proof, as well as what we've observed ourselves, that anywhere there are predators, lionfish are almost nowhere to be seen. That clearly shows that lionfish are being preyed upon.
So now indigenous fish can slowly but surely return in numbers. Faced with the ever-advancing wave of tourism, Leslie and Noel are never short of imagination when it comes to inspecting and protecting the health of the coral. They've come up with the most remarkably inventive technique. It enables them to inspect nearly 200 kilometres of reef in 100 dives. Coral polyps are animals similar to jellyfish and which stick to surfaces and form a limestone skeleton around themselves. The accumulation of billions and billions of these animals make up the coral reefs. Bioluminescence is the light produced by certain living organisms, and healthy corals produce this light, although it's not easy to see it. An intense blue light activates luciferin, the chemical compound which creates luminescence. So by wearing a yellow mask which blocks out the blue spectrum, the coral appears in a completely different aspect. Green, yellow, orange, red. Each variety of coral has its own vibrant colour. Leslie and Noel enter into a world that humans rarely get to see, as if nature has given them a fish-eye's view. The reef lets them into its world, at once both infinitely fragile and endlessly powerful. Seen from this angle, it's hard not to agree that the Cuban reefs are full of life. But at the same time, it's clear that the slightest touch of any bit of coral means destroying dozens of polyps. 200,000 divers today, 500,000 in 5 years' time. How many more in 20 years? The reef won't be able to survive in the long run. Which is why the National Centre for Protected Areas has taken its latest decision. There are to be no more dive centres set up in Cuban marine parks, and the numbers of divers will be limited annually. This is the only way that this particular wonder of nature will be preserved for future generations. Cuban people, both proud and aware of their country's natural riches, don't expect a saviour from the outside. 5 centuries after Columbus's arrival, the first cruise ships sail by in almost total indifference. But this nature-blessed island, this ecological paradise, will gradually become a jewel, rarer by the year. And who knows if the younger Cuban generations will be able to offer the same resistance as their parents and safeguard their unique country for generations to come. Or will they give in to the ever-increasing pressure from those in search of the thrills and sensations which interfere with the fragile natural balance of island? Only time will tell.